Can you make fresh homemade pizza dough and freeze it to use later? The answer is yes. And while there's a few small steps you have to make sure to do, it's all extremely simple, and we're going to go through all of it right now. The first thing to do is to make the pizza dough, starting by combining water that's heated to 105 degrees Fahrenheit with my yeast. Give that a quick stir and let it bloom for 5 to 10 minutes. And don't worry about the quantities and measurements. I'll have a link to the exact pizza dough recipe I use in the video description. Once the yeast is looking foamy, in goes my flour, followed by the salt. And I'll start mixing that on low speed for a couple minutes in the stand mixer with dough hook. And by the way, I'm using double O flour because it's the gold standard for pizza dough, but all-purpose or bread flour will also work. After a couple minutes, when it's looking like a cohesive hunk of dough, I'll increase the mixer speed to medium and let it knead for about another 8 minutes. Then I'll turn the dough out onto a floured surface and form it into a tight ball. It should be somewhat sticky, but if it's too sticky to even handle, you can pat just a little more flour into it. Next, lightly grease a bowl with some olive oil and drop in that ball. Cover with plastic wrap and leave it all alone for 90 minutes to rise. After 90 minutes, my dough has about doubled in size, so I'll punch it down a bit and drop it back onto a floured surface. Now to portion it out, based on how big and thick I want to make my pizzas. I usually like to separate it into 2 portions, and I can choose between making a larger pizza with thinner crust or a slightly smaller pizza with thicker crust. I'll form each of those dough segments into a tight ball, making sure any seams are on the bottom. Then those dough balls are going onto a baking sheet that's lined with parchment paper or a silicone baking mat. And now for the flash freezing step. This just involves sticking that whole tray into the freezer, uncovered, for a couple hours. This will harden up the dough balls enough that they won't become squished or deformed during the next steps. Once they're pretty frozen and quite hard, it's time to wrap them tightly in plastic. I'll lay out a sheet of plastic wrap, set the dough ball on it, and coat the whole dough ball lightly in olive oil. This will help keep the plastic from sticking to the dough, as well as serve as just another layer of protection against freezer burn. Then I'll wrap that thing up nice and tight, and then double wrap with a second sheet of plastic. At this point, we have 2 options. 1, you can just throw your wrapped dough balls into a Ziploc bag. Or 2, the method that I always use, you can vacuum seal. If there was any question about the tightness or integrity of that plastic wrap, vacuum sealing with a FoodSaver type machine will eliminate all doubt that these dough balls are protected. When oiled, double wrapped in plastic, and then vacuum sealed, freezer burn doesn't stand a chance. And you're giving your dough the best possible chance to come back to life and become a beautiful pizza crust after thawing. Now all I have to do is write today's date on them and throw them into the freezer. The internet says you should thaw and use them within 1 month, but I've used dough that I froze as much as 6 months ago, and it's come out very good. Now we're jumping ahead a couple weeks to when I want to thaw one of these dough balls out. I'd like to make pizza tomorrow, so I'm throwing one of those dough balls into the fridge today to start thawing. The next day, it's no longer frozen, and you can see how the dough has started to somewhat rise again, practically inflating the vacuum seal bag it's in. Anyway, I'll cut the bag open, take it out of the plastic wrap, and set the dough ball on a plate or cutting board. I'll loosely lay some of the plastic over top just to prevent it from drying out while I let it sit out at room temperature for an hour or 2. This dough is thawed, but still quite cold from the fridge. It's going to stretch and become pizza shaped much better if I let it warm up a bit first. Now I'm finally ready to make some pizza, and while I'm notoriously untalented at shaping dough, and that includes for pizza, I'll do my best to pull and stretch and shape this thing about to the shape and size of my pizza pan. And I'll just finish making my pizza. I'm going pretty basic today. Spread down my sauce, cover with some quality mozzarella shreds, top with thick pepperoni and sliced red onion. That looks pretty good to me, so into the oven it goes. And I'd say that is a perfectly delicious looking pizza. Its diameter is pretty large, which means my crust is pretty thin, which is exactly what I was in the mood for today. Anyhow, that crust looks pretty darn good considering it was frozen solid for the last 2 weeks. And in case you're wondering, this crust has a nice chew with just the right amount of crispiness. So that's about it. Really pretty simple and straightforward. Start with a good pizza dough recipe and good ingredients. Follow the steps of making the dough and freezing it and thawing it, and you're going to end up with a really good pizza made from that frozen dough. And check out the video description if you want to see the exact measurements and everything for the pizza dough recipe that I use. And be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future food freezing and dough recipe videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.